Good evening. This is our economic and fiscal update of our 2026 budget highlights. My name is Jennifer Hoffman. I'm the City County Manager. I'm joined tonight by our economist, Jeff Romine, and Graham Clark, our Director of Finance. The presentation that we're going to go through tonight is the same presentation that staff was able to present to Council just this past Tuesday evening. The difference in the presentation is we will be fielding questions from our audience. This is a enormously important year for the City and County of Broomfield, not just because of the financial circumstances, but overall you'll see a shift in approach. And part of that approach comes with the structural modifications based on the revenue streams that being a combined city and county, you become reliant on, and our pots of money from the various revenue streams, of course, sales tax being from the city, property tax being from the county. So anytime one of those revenue streams decreases, you have to solve for the totality of that financial circumstance and not just from the county perspective. First slide, please. So tonight's discussion, I'm not going to read through each one of these bullets, but the presentation is built around the memo. For those that have not read the memo, while I understand that it is lengthy, it is well worth the read. Not only from an informational perspective, but from a narrative perspective, where we were, where we are, where we're going, and those general themes throughout. Next slide, please. While we've always had a strategic and disciplined approach, this year and 2027 and into 2028, we are honing with a structural modification. I know many folks are well-versed that the special session is back in right now with our legislature. And part of that conversation, anytime that you hear in a budget connotation that there is a structural deficit, that does not mean that increasing revenue is going to solve it. It doesn't mean that just increasing or decreasing service levels will address it. When you're talking about a structural deficit, it means that some modification from structure, which means how you process it, what you look at, the degree to which you look at it, the levers, and what is that, again, the totality of circumstances of how you're making your decision. What is that filter through which you're making your decisions? Those are structural modifications. We're presenting a framework tonight for how we came to the 2026 budget, started with the 2025 revised. I'm sure most of you can understand the differentiation between actuals and budgeted. From our household, we all have budgets. A budget is what we anticipate spending in any particular period of time. Actuals, of course, is what you actually spend. That delta between what you thought you were going to spend and what you actually spent is really where, from a structural perspective, you need to be mindful, because you don't want to be, your budgeted amounts should influence your decision making, but it shouldn't be the decision maker. Your actuals should be the filter through which you're making fundamental and structural decisions. Spending within our means. We call that out in bold, not because we haven't been doing it, but because it's going to be becoming increasingly challenging in order to do that with the service levels that we have, the programs, the projects, the initiatives that have been put into place pre-COVID and enhanced post-COVID. Next slide, please. One of the key components when we're talking about structure and the influence from the models is that Broomfield, in its 34 square miles, is now considered, and has been, quite frankly, for, I would say, the last 3 to 4 years, as a maturing community. So in the past, decisions could be made, higher risk decisions could be made because there was so much room and opportunity for additional growth, additional economic growth, additional commercial growth. One of the components that Mr. Romine will speak to tonight is the long-range financial plan. In years past, that long-range financial plan was reviewed, modified, and altered based on current circumstances, but it wasn't frequent updates. They were really snapshots in time. The reason it's key as we mature is because those levels of risk are now significantly less. In other words, the decisions that we make have immediate impact, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So it's a much more complex decision-making rather than should we do it or shouldn't we do it based on something really great's going to happen in the future. Now that we are in the midst of new development, everyone's favorite, infill development and redevelopment, each one of those brings challenges from a staff perspective, from a council perspective, and from a community perspective. Each one of those levels of development brings, to varying degrees, the need to be introspective about, is it revenue positive, revenue neutral, or revenue negative? All of those pieces need to be factored in as we recommend to council the directions that we need to go on these, not just strategic initiatives, but council and community priorities. Next slide, please. So you'll see the theme from growth to management. You'll see it in our enterprise fund. You'll see it in our development acumen and conversations about those fiscal notes that are now attached to every council memo. We are now to the place where it's a reallocation methodology. It's not a prioritization. There's a finite pot of funds. We have solved in 25R, which means the 25 revised budget, and the new budget for 2026. Part of that immediate solving was for the decrease because of the legislative decisions that were made with regards to property tax. So not only the residential property tax ratcheting down, but also the commercial property tax ratcheting down. And there isn't a process, procedure, or conversation to do anything but keep that flat and possibly even decrease it more. Mr. Romine will talk about not only the assessment rate, but the value assessment. So when your property is valued less and you have a reduction in the property tax rate, for Broomfield specifically, you wind up with $6 to $8 million that won't be returning to the budget. That places the emphasis and priority of ensuring that when we're making decisions or recommendations, we have to ensure that we're taking care of what we have first from an asset management perspective. What does that look like from an infrastructure perspective, streets and road perspective, staffing perspective, level of service, before any additional anticipation of initiatives, programs, or projects? So again, we get back to that, got to take care of the fundamental basics. And then we look at what those trade-offs are. What aren't we going to do in order to accommodate any of the new and or enhanced version of what the community wants us to do as we move forward? Next slide, please. I'm turning it now over to Mr. Romine, and then Mr. Clark will be after that, and then we'll field any questions that you all may have. I appreciate you being here tonight. It means a lot to us. We do a lot to prepare for these conversations, and when you take your time during the evening to show up, we certainly appreciate it. We appreciate the folks online as well.
Thank you, City County Manager Hoffman. Members of the community, thank you both online as well as in person. Thanks for coming out tonight. As Jennifer said, we do spend a lot of time on this, so it's great to talk to people and have a conversation. So I'm going to do a quick summary of where we think the economy is. We're then going to I'll talk also about the long-range financial plan. So those will be the two aspects I'll talk about. Those of you who are able to attend or have watched the council meeting from last Tuesday, I'll be seeing many of the same things and probably almost in the same way. But nevertheless, and also if you've been watching over the last year, we started seeing these same themes back at the council focus session in February and again at the update in April. So you shouldn't be hearing anything different. We're just getting a little bit more solid in some of the things. And the first one is, of course, what is the state of the economy? As mentioned back in April when we gave our last update, there was a lot of uncertainty in the economy, and we just weren't sure where things were going. There was talk about what might be tax rates, talk about what might be spending, what might be tariffs. On the list went. Well, now we have a fair amount of firming up on those proposals at the national level and also at the state level, because at this point, the national level, they passed the bills through Congress. At the state level, the legislature has passed certain bills. They've obviously adjourned. Now, as Manager Hoffman pointed out, we're in a special session to address some of the other budget and financial issues. So what we know and what most economists are now saying around the country and is really what the data is showing, which is more important than sometimes what the opinions are. What the data is showing is we're moving into and are in a period of stagflation. That is a unique type of economic experience. Normally people know, and you've heard of recessions, you've heard of high growth periods, you've even heard historically of depressions. This is something that's a little bit unique. It's not unique in the world, it's something that's unique in the US. Stagflation has been occurring in Japan for a number of years. It's something that that we've experienced. What it amounts to is a slow growth economy, but it's an economy that's, while stable, it's also not necessarily working as well as you would want. And therefore it changes some of the outcomes. What ends up happening in a stagflation economy, it's a result of both increasing levels of inflation, at the same time increasing levels of unemployment. Those normally work in opposite directions economically. So for both of them to go in the same direction, and we're seeing many indicators and even data now showing that those are both rising, both at the US level, at the state level, the metro area, and even in Broomfield. Although we don't have quite the same level of obviously data that we might at the national or state level, but we can see some of the indications of that. Briefly, and this isn't the time where we go into a lot of numbers, but it really sets the stage. But nevertheless, the unemployment rate has been rising slightly. It is expected to continue to rise. As many of you know from the news, we're seeing both private sector and public sector layoffs. The strength of the economy, the employment growth of the economy over the last quarter or more was primarily through local government. And so now as we're seeing local governments and school districts restricting their employment, in some cases even doing reductions in force or layoffs, we're going to see some levels of unemployment rising. To what level? We don't know yet what the severity is and how those will be absorbed, but it is occurring on both sides of the economy. At the same time, we're seeing the CPI rising, the inflation rate, which is a traditional measure done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They do it both for the nation as well as small areas, sub-areas and states. In our particular case, it's Denver, Aurora, and it's been rising slightly. In both of those cases, though, we're doing better than the nation over the states. So we're still a stronger economy than other places, but nevertheless, we're seeing those indicators. When I look out on the CPI, even though it hasn't risen much, it has risen. The producer price index, which is an indicator of where producers, i.e. businesses, are seeing price increases, that is rising at a faster rate. That's usually a foreshadowing of future inflation occurring in the next 3 to 6 months. So all of that is going on. At the meantime, as many of you may have seen in the headlines in the economic news, for those of you who read that, whether it's the top level or in depth, GDP grew at 2% last quarter. This is a little bit slower than you normally would expect. And so there is a slowing down of the economy, which is not unexpected, but it is something that is a little bit concerning. And that, again, is part of the elements of a stagflation. Those of you who know, and I didn't put the numbers in, but roughly 70% of the GDP is calculated off of consumer spending. It's what we all spend. And when I say I'm talking about the consumers. The business side of the GDP is roughly 15%. The governmental side is around 8%. And then the import-export, the net trade is the remainder portion. So those are the four factors of GDP as they're measured. And I've given you just a quick thumbnail of what is going on there. When you look at the data, that's what you see business investment is slowing. In many cases, we don't know if it's just being put off or if it's being canceled. So what we're thinking right now is it's just been put on hold until there's some clarity around some of the uncertainty within the economy. Government is shrinking, though, at almost every level, and for various reasons. Government, at least at the state level and at the local level, has to run a balanced budget. And so therefore, if there's a reduction in revenues through sales tax or property tax, obviously there has to be adjustments made. And Graham will talk a little bit about that, of the adjustments we're making here due to some of those reductions in revenue we forecasted and are thinking are coming. Next slide, please. The economy, though, right now, what we're seeing is this, and this is what the voters approved in the last federal election, is a change in the economy and a change in some of the directions. So these policy choices that the voters had approved, whether you agree or disagree, that is not my role. My role is to try to understand that. Those are now coming into effect. At the same time, the trade effects or the tariff effects are starting to come into effect. And I'll reference those a little bit later in this same slide. But those are coming, and those are having impacts on local businesses here and within the state. In many cases, it's causing them to put the hold on some of those things, and it is affecting construction, retail, renewables, and technology. And we're expecting, and most people are expecting those impacts to amplify in the next few months. So we'll get greater clarity, but that's what we're seeing today. And that is what is impacting us as we think about how we should affect our budgets for 2026. The households are also seeing those same things. Many people have, in the first quarter, you opened up your 401ks or your retirement accounts and you saw a lot of red. Now we're seeing a lot of black. We're basically about where we were, I think, for many people on some of those accounts. But nevertheless, that has caused people to adjust their spending patterns. And there's other things that I'll talk about a little bit later. And so those effects are coming from both sides, the policy effects, the tax effects, and those outcomes. And so what you're seeing, and what you'll see both the Congressional Budget Office, the Tax Foundation, and many other people that look very closely at it, is you see the unevenness of how these are affecting different people at different households at different ages and different incomes. I told you 3 months ago, I did not want to get into great depth on the tariffs. I mentioned earlier to you tonight that I would talk a little bit more. So what I've done is, as many people know, that at the national level, the general view is the average tariff level is about 18 to 20%, is what has come in place. That is a historic high going back close to 100 years. Previously, we were at about a 5 to 7% tariff level, depending on industry and other things. So this is a significant difference in economic policy, and it's having positive and negative effects, as you would expect on anything. But I wanted to look specifically at how that will impact us here as best we can. And so what I did is I looked at our key trading partners, and you can see the list. It's Mexico, Canada, EU, China, and South Korea. Those 5 areas, I would say 5 countries, but EU is not obviously a country, but it's a singular market. That's 70% of our imports. That's 58% of our exports from Colorado. So what that tells you is that those 5 areas have a very significant impact on our local economy, both as consumers and as business, but also as we sell goods overseas and services overseas. The average tariff weighted on those areas, those 5 areas, is 29.2%. What that means, to kind of distill that number, is the impacts of tariffs, the ones that are going to impact us, are more pronounced, and they're going to have a greater impact on our local economy. And so that's something that we should be watching and we should be mindful of, is that influence will be coming through in a way that we haven't really seen before. And again, as for many of you know, as you go over to the Interlochen area, but even Hunter Douglas is an example, a longtime Broomfield company, they are international firms, many of these. Hunter Douglas is an international firm. And they are owned overseas, but they are also producing goods that go all kinds of places, and they're importing goods from all kinds of places. And so this impact is coming, it will come and is affecting Broomfield specifically, as well as Colorado as a whole. Next slide, please. There are four factors that I think are going to affect our immediate local economy. This isn't, I'm not talking about the national level, and you can talk about these at a national level too, but I really wanted to hone in on the four major influencing factors this time that it really is going to affect Broomfield. Obviously, interest rates, that goes without saying. Everybody knows that it's affecting our housing market, it's affecting the business market, it's affecting us as consumers. We're seeing rising debt. Consumer debt, and therefore, because we're seeing a rising consumer debt, therefore, that the higher interest rates are affecting that consumer debt and the ability for households to buy the goods and services they want. Consumer spending, the main thing I wanted to just emphasize here is we're still experiencing that behavioral change that we started seeing during the COVID period. People are shopping online. They are changing their shopping behavior. We've also, because of the age of the community and the behavior of households of all ages, we're now into much more of an experienced economy than a goods economy. So 20 years ago, we bought a lot of goods. Now we're buying experiences oftentimes. And so, you know, how those things affect us, because experiences may not necessarily result in sales taxes for us, whereas goods did. So those things are coming through. We're seeing changing employment patterns. That's both with firms and how they're hiring and how they're utilizing their labor, but also the employees and how they want to work. That's having a demonstrative effect on restaurants, example, on Mondays and Fridays around Interlochen, because those are, you know, people are working hybrid, and so they're a little bit more vacant on those days. The offices are occupied, but the people aren't coming in, they're working from home. And then finally, the other thing that we're starting to see as we talk to the state demographer is delayed household formation and household size. And so the population, the childbearing ages and the family formations are changing. And it's recognized at the national level. Those of you who have been paying attention to transportation policy and the evolution of transportation policy, one of the initiatives that the administration is pointing out is transportation dollars may be allocated based upon households and household formation, as an example. That was something that they were proposing. So that's a different thing rather than ridership. And so we're starting to see those kinds of effects and how they might go. Not all of those are necessarily known, but they are all impacting us in various ways. Number three, of course, is the real estate markets. As many of you know, it slowed down. You can see the slowdown across Broomfield and across the metro area, and you can hear about it across the nation. And so what we're hearing from actually talking to the developers and talking to the construction crews, they are now going to much more of an on-demand approach. So what do they think they can sell in the next quarter? So they're not building extra units to have them sit on the market. They slowed down. So as an example, in one case, they were supposed to bring on 58 more housing units. They think they're really going to bring in 29, and they're pushing the next 29 into 26. So it's being delayed. Maybe 3 months, maybe 6, we don't know, but that's having an impact and will have a future impact. On the commercial side, it's really a tale of two markets. And what I mean by that is retail. 5 years ago, one of the greatest questions I would get from city council or from the community was, nobody's ever going to go into a shopping mall again. Nobody's ever going to go into a store again. Well, clearly we do. Clearly we're seeing people in the shop and that kind of behavior's returned. Now what we're saying is nobody's going into offices anymore. We're already seeing from around the country some early signs of rebound on the office markets, but I will say this on both of them. We will not return to the level of people buying goods in stores like we did in the teens, and we are not going to see the level of offices and office occupancy and office construction like we saw in the teens. So it's a new normal on both those markets. One is already rebounded and the other is probably rebounding in the next 5 years, but it will not rebound back to the 2019 levels. And finally, business employment, I've already talked about that. What we're seeing because of all these various factors like the closures, the layoffs, the consolidations that we're experiencing with businesses and others, there's going to be likely some shifts occurring on the employment side and continuing to occur on the employment side. And we're also expecting probably slightly lower changes in wage levels. Next slide, please. How does that all result? results in our two primary revenue sources that operate the city and county of Broomfield: property tax and sales tax. I'm going to talk about property tax first, not because it's the larger of the two, it's actually the smaller of the two, but just barely. But it's the one that we've been able to foreshadow and see a little bit earlier than the other. And that is the legislature, and I say this in the most positive way, in their infinite wisdom, had two sessions where they really focused on property tax and property tax reform. And what the trigger that they could do is they could change the assessment rate. So as a quick reminder, Jen talked about this earlier, Manager Hoffman talked about this earlier. There are three parts of the calculation to get to your property tax level. The first is the market value. So as was somewhat expected, we expected some of the market values to go flat or to slightly grow after this very expansive period, especially on the residential side over the last 5 years. So that has occurred. In some cases in Broomfield, it's fallen as much as 5 or 6%. In some cases, it's gone up slightly, but generally across Broomfield, it went down. The market values on average went down about 3%. So that was a lowering effect on the property tax from that side, so the market value. The second thing was the legislature changed the assessment rate. So what you do in Colorado is you take the market value, you multiply it by the assessment rate, and that becomes the assessed value, which is what the taxes are calculated against. So in Colorado, the legislature decided to change it from, at that point, a temporary period of about 6.9 down to about an average of 6.5. So that means let's say you have a $100,000 house for simplicity's sake. You multiply instead of by 6.9, you multiply it by 6.5. And so it results in a lower assessed value. So that was the tax relief that the legislature could provide. They also lowered, as Manager Hoffman pointed out, the commercial side. That has not changed since 1982, really, because it was set by the Gallagher Amendment, and now the legislature has lowered that down to it will become 25%. So there's a slight modification on the commercial side, a slight modification on the residential side. When Gallagher went in place back in the 80s, the residential assessment rate was in the 20% range. So it's a very significant change, and that's been just the characteristic of it. So, but the commercial was always set. Now that is floating downward also. So both those two sides combined to what we estimated is about a $3 million reduction in the property tax proceeds that we'd be receiving from that effect. Because of the combined of those, then it turns out to be about 6 to 8%. So 3 from the assessment side, 3 from the market change, and that's what creates that 6 to 8 million. We have been saying those numbers now for a long period of time. The precision of it, I wish we could be a little bit more precise, but we were in the midst of some appeals and some other things, and so we were trying to figure out the estimates of what would be coming in 26. Those are getting settled to be able to get to a very much more specific number coming forward, but that's where the range we're using. And the normal philosophy of Manager Hoffman in the direction she provides to both Mr. Clark and I is we should be conservative on the revenue side and then be a little bit high if we need to be on the cost side, so that therefore we will end up with a balanced budget if everything doesn't fall exactly right. So be a little bit lower on your revenue. It's what most people do in their own households, right? You overestimate what your utility bill might be on electric and hope that you can turn off a few more lights. So there's things you can control on the cost side, but on the revenue, you're kind of there. And so that's how we've done it. So that's why we have the 6 to 8 million. It's probably going to come in right around 7.2, 7.3, but we're not exactly sure quite yet. Sales tax revenue. We saw and we've experienced now those changes in consumer spending. We have been monitoring it. We monitor it every month, as you can imagine. Sales taxes collected from the consumer by the businesses, depending on the size of the business, they're either paid monthly or quarterly paid into the city and county. So therefore, we look at it monthly, though. And what we're seeing, just as a quick note, and Mr. Clark has included this into the revised budgets, we're seeing roughly a 2% increase above the 2024 actuals is what we're seeing at this point. I say that, and Mr. Clark would answer this question, I think, exactly the same way I would. Well, it's only through basically June right now, because they have to collect it, then they remit it. So we've only got about half a year in. So what the second half of the year is, and those of you who can think about sales spending and consumer spending, Most of it occurs in the second half of the year because we're back to school, and then the biggest period is obviously the holiday season. So we're cautious that it's going to be stronger than 24. We believe it is, but we are still sitting roughly at 24 numbers, which is what we need, what we had adjusted things to. Next slide, please. So this just basically sets up. The only thing I would really point out here is two things. We have a very strong economy here. We have a diversified business base. It's established. It's one of the stronger ones when you consider a community of our size. A lot of other suburbs, suburban communities do not have the business base that we do. We have a large industrial park. We have manufacturing. So we're very strong and diversified. And that's going to bode us well, and has boded us well to get through 26 into 27 and 28. The other thing I would just point out is the staff focus. Some of you may have been watching city government and seeing what Broomfield's been up to. Approximately 3.5 years ago, there was a council retreat where we really began the conversations about thinking about how we should be focusing on the fiscal side and the financial side and the budgeting side. So in 23 and 24, we began to deliberate. We informed council. We began to move forward with that approach. 25, we are formulating this policy and this approach, as Manager Hoffman has pointed out. 26 is the execution year. That has allowed us to be in a place, unlike some of our sister cities around the metro area, to be able to withstand the slowdowns that they're experiencing and the budget challenges they're facing in a much more positive manner than they have to. I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder, but that's the reason, is because we've been thinking and working and doing our research and preparing and setting up the policies and approaches for close to 3 years for this type of thing. Didn't want to, in the sense of, boy, wish this wouldn't be the circumstance of the economy that we're in, but aren't we glad that we did this background work? And so 27, after we do execution, 26, 27 will be continuation. That's the end. I'm going to take a quick pause, because that's the end of the economic side. Now I'm going to talk about something called the long-range financial plan. So just to create a little bit of a break. I'm not going to change clothes or anything. So next slide, please. Long-range financial plan, some of you may have heard of this thing. It has been in place, and it's been a part of the city's approach, city and county's approach, since 2004. We update it once every 5 years or so. It varies a little bit, but generally it's been about once every 5 years. The last update was in 2021, and we used the 2020 actuals to do that modeling, as well as obviously updated the modeling with other research and other things. As Manager Hoffman pointed out, it's relatively stable and static from that point on, and we utilize it then until we do another update. First thing, because of COVID and because of the way the economy has changed in a way that we have not experienced here in Broomfield nor in Colorado in 20 or 30 years, the decision was we can't do that once every 5 years. We need to have an approach and a model that is updated regularly with information. The structure can stay the same in certain ways, but the data definitely has to be updated frequently. So that's what we're in the process of. This work will be completed in the first quarter of 2026. So it'll be, this council has directed us to do it. The next council will be benefiting from that direction because we'll have a new informed thing. So as I mentioned, it will have new informed economic and market patterns, obviously the online spending, other things like that, and it'll include other factors that we feel are really important to make it much more of a informative decision-making tool than it already is. We have talked to the Governmental Finance, GFOA, Governmental Finance Officer Association, who is doing our work around the ERP, because this is an element how those two link together. And they have said, and we're talking to them more, and they're going to do obviously some more research on our work, but they've said the model that you guys have been using is more elaborate and more complete than most other communities do. So we felt really good about that, but it also meant that we have to live up to that challenge. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we've been updating most recently is the land use information that feeds into it, that talks about what we are seeing both on development. We've included something most on the last iteration, but really now it's truly into the model, and that is redevelopment and reinvestment. So as many of you know, there used to be this area called neighborhood or Flatirons Marketplace. It used to be a big box center just at the intersection. It's almost all completely been torn down and it's being replaced by housing. We're seeing that other kinds of redevelopment and reinvestment occurring. Some of you may recall there was a drug manufacturer in Broomfield called Sandoz, and they made pharmaceuticals. And the facility was located. It was a 400,000 square foot building. It had been added on to several times. A new company has come in and purchased it. They tore down 100,000 square feet out of the center of it to create a much more lively, interactive campus that they'll be unveiling shortly. And so what we're seeing is that reinvestment. It is not something that Broomfield had experienced before because Broomfield was basically what some people refer to as a greenfield community. All the development went in places that had never been developed before. Now the energy and the excitement is coming back to those core areas. It creates both opportunities and challenges. It utilizes existing infrastructure and other things, roads and others, but at the same time, they have to, in some places, be upgraded. So if you had a shopping center, the water usage in that area is relatively low. And if you put in 1,000 housing units, guess what? You've got to grow the size of the pipes. And so there is both pluses and minuses, as Manager Hoffman is talking about. The infrastructure challenges of redevelopment are different than the infrastructure challenges of greenfield development. This shows you the snapshot of the next 5 years, according to the most recent land use information. We will be updating this quarterly, and it'll be inputted into the model every quarter so that it'll be alive. And we get this information as noted by talking to developers, market experts, contractors, and others. So these are the number of your residential units that are being planned and entitled and that can come forward in the next 5 years. And then you can see that 100,000 square foot demolition I just talked about. You can see it in the first 2025 numbers. $100,000 or 100,000 square feet comes down, it's going to create a negative. And so you can see that actually coming through. I would note that in the 27, 28, and 29, those are effectively those major catalytic projects we've been talking about and when they are planning to come on and be in place. And that is the Flatirons Crossing reinvestment. And some of that is already underway. Construction's already underway. And they will soon be announcing several of the tenants that will be coming in. And also, of course, Baseline and the Center Street District, they are doing their horizontal development, i.e. that means they're starting to put in their infrastructure and doing their groundwork. And then they'll be going vertical within roughly a year. And then, of course, the other one is Broomfield Town Square. They'll be coming to council on September 23rd for an update, to provide council an update of where they are on their plans, what the status is, and what their schedule is looking like. That'll be coming up, and those of you who are interested in Broomfield Town Square, again, that's September 23rd. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we decided to do, because of a number of reasons, but we were at a certain point where we felt we could have some preliminary numbers. So these will adjust, and I want to be very clear that these are preliminary. We have some more work to do, but in testing against the 2021 model, the 25 or the 26 preliminary numbers come in relatively in the same level. So we felt comfortable with using them right now. And so from using that model, approximately 55% of our revenue is coming from the commercial side. 45% is coming from the residential side. So that means on the residential side, it's a small portion of the sales tax, a portion of it, about 17%. It's the property tax for the residential. On the commercial side, it's the rest of the sales tax, and it's obviously the property tax for the commercial buildings. And so as you weigh them out, that's what it comes out to based upon actual numbers. And so that's where we see the revenue coming in, and that's how it breaks down. So when you've heard Manager Hoffman and others speak about the balance of development in Broomfield and how we've been successful, it's because of that balance, and this is what that shows. And how that is currently existing. So that's what the model then produces and goes forward to see how that balance evolves with some of the land use. On the other side of it, of course, you want to attribute the cost to where they necessarily are. Many of the programs and services that are provided by the city and county of Broomfield, like every other local government, is done and supports residential needs and wants, services and programs. And so when you go into a rec center, or you go to a park, it's not being utilized by a lot of people that are working in the Interlochen or at King Soopers or Home Depot or wherever. It's often community residents. And so we try to figure that out. And so what we're currently estimating is about 75% of our expenses are related to residential, serving our residents. It's something that, of course, council wants to support, the community wants to support. We value that. It's the open space, it's the rec centers, it's library, it's all of those things. And so that's where it's coming, and that's where the expense. So think about it again. Revenue is relatively balanced, but on expenses, it's primarily attributed to the residential side, with about 25% of the benefit occurring to the commercial. So what that results in is, the next slide, please. We do this because it just gives a simple snapshot. Now, this is a typical home or an average home. So that means it's valued at around $575,000. So when we attribute it across, that's what we're thinking about. Obviously, there are some $2 million homes, and they're paying more in property tax than a $575,000 house. What their level of usage of the library or the rec center probably varies too, but there's some degree that we just can't understand everything. And we are not, sadly, although it'd be a great data exercise, we are not modeling 33,000 housing units on what you're doing every night. We just don't know what you're going to, and it is not our business. So we do a typical. And so this what gives you the breakdown. What I like about this version of it, you may have seen this in the past, is we actually reflected the existing, the city council and the community's priorities related to what is important. Police, public safety is at the foundation of this community, and that is the blue. Then you've got human services and parks and rec and public works. It's not to say everything isn't important in that household layer cake there that we have, but it shows you that kind of foundational things. And that's quite frankly where a lot of the money is spent. A lot of the expenditures are focused in those key areas that have been established and directed through the community surveys every 2 years and by city council. And so that gives you the amount. You will note that the total expenses, and this is without the CIP numbers, but it's about $4,700 per household. Now, you can, if you have really good eyes, better than mine, even though I did this chart, I colored it in gray and I probably shouldn't have done that, but I'm going to show you those numbers now in the next slide. So if you'd switch to the next slide, please, sir. So that's what it turns out to be. So the full cost, including CIP, it's about $6,100 is the cost for a single family home. And the attributable portion of all the revenue source is about $3,500. So therefore, as a community, for a typical household, it costs us about $2,500 beyond the revenue to pay for the services of that home. You can see the apartments, and that's roughly about 673. In part, that's because of the smaller household sizes of apartments, and also they just have different values and other things. And in talking to some of our colleagues, which we'll do again, there's a different utilization pattern that occurs between single family, household families, and apartment families. They use different services and other things. So we'll be revisiting some of those things as part of our work over the next 6 months, but that gives you a snapshot. And so you can see on the residential side, it's a net negative. And we said that going on, I couldn't even tell you, it's probably before my time. So at least 6 years and probably 15 or more. On the commercial side, then you can see it's done by square foot. So don't think it's a dollar. These are square foot is the calculation, rather than the housing unit. And you can see what those different ones from a cost standpoint and from a revenue standpoint. And you can see those percentages I talked about earlier. And so you see the net effect. And so the net fiscal effect is we obviously get a fair amount of return for every square foot of retail and restaurant. And so that's what's going on. You can see the office and innovation spaces. And the reason why we've clumped those together is, again, we're updating the model to reflect the more market patterns. So some of you know that there's a company, as an example, named Conga, which is a software development company that's located in a light industrial building that's 70,000 square feet up on the northeast or northwest side of Broomfield, up in Via Vara. That's what we're seeing up in Baseline. Some of those, what you would think are manufacturing spaces, are actually research facilities and office spaces and technology. So what we're experiencing is the people that are working in a lot of these offices nowadays are no longer working in the traditional office. They're working in very innovative spaces. And some people call them fun spaces. They have big swings, they have pool tables, they have scooters running around. It's great fun, but that's the kinds of space. So that's why they're accumulated or created that way. So that is, this is the end of my portion of the presentation. While Graham comes up, I would just conclude again that this work will be done in January, or in the first quarter, I should say, probably February of 2026. This is our goal. And this informs then as we think about the 27 and forward budgets as we begin to build things like that. So at that, I'm going to conclude and Graham Clark will start up. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, Graham Clark, Finance Director. I'll begin tonight by discussing the initial draft of the 2026 proposed budget, which will be distributed to council and the public in a couple of weeks. Next slide, James. Okay, this year, the budget development process underwent comprehensive reform. We emphasized data-driven decision-making and enhanced historical spending analysis. The budget team, in collaboration with each department, did a thorough review of every line item expense from the organization. This budget optimization was a year-long process, and it began right after the 2025 budget was adopted, including multiple meetings with each department. This included a review of 3 spending categories: mandates, critical to operations, and obligations. We reviewed every contract and looked with an eye to discern if this was the best use of funds. Based on the above, it is staff's finding that there really is no available funding for additional community programs or initiatives. Our approach was to intentionally not affect the community's current levels of service. Next slide. During this review, funding remained largely whole in 2 areas: police and public works. Over the last 4 years, the police FTEs, full-time equivalents, that's employees, grew from 242 to 277, a 14% increase. The police budget expanded from 34 million to 44 million over 4 years, marking a 27% increase. This investment is directly linked to Broomfield maintaining the lowest crime per capita in the Front Range. Similarly, we've continued the emphasis on funding critical infrastructure in public works and utilities. In public works, FTEs went from 158 to 220 over 5 years, and the overall budget increased 50%. Next slide. Because of the financial constraints that Jeff was mentioning, and an intentional effort to be the best-in-class have a best-in-class financial structure, we made several strategic structural adjustments to the 2025 revised and the 2026 budget. And those include a vehicle replacement pause for the next 2 years, reduced travel and training to a minimum. We're going to be undergoing a rigorous review of vacant positions, not only the vacant ones now, but the ones that will be becoming vacant in the current months. And we've also leveraged AI across the organization. Next slide. The comprehensive budget review was primarily on the non-personnel side. This was important because it allowed us to focus on our people. We were able to maintain a merit increase in the 2026 proposed budget, along with the organization absorbing all of the 14% increase to health insurance premiums for 2026. Next slide. In addition to budget development, finance staff, along with IT and HR, have spent the last 2 years preparing, and the last 6 months scoping, interviewing consultants, and demoing new ERP solutions. In July, a decision was made on the next financial and HR solution. Implementation is set to begin in late 2025. This new system should provide better accuracy, transparency, and a user-friendly way to view the overall city and county budget. Next slide. Similar to the operating budget, the efforts to manage capital projects for the 2026 budget are in response to this constrained revenue projection over the next couple of years. During the budget development, some non-critical CIP, that's capital improvement program, for those that don't know, some of the CIP projects have been delayed while we still focus on repair and rehabilitation of key existing infrastructure. Next slide. Like most cities and counties, we have annual programs that receive funding each year, such as the ADA curb ramp project. This has funding from previous years that have accumulated over the last few years and is adequate for 2026. The delay in these smaller CIP projects allow project managers to focus better on the large financed projects that we'll be talking about coming up. Next slide. So I'm also going to pause and move over from the budget to enterprise fund considerations. Now, the enterprise fund is your water, your wastewater, your stormwater, and your reuse. Those are considered enterprise funds because they're business funds, and they're only paid for by user rates. And so it doesn't include the property taxes or the sales tax revenue, which we discussed earlier. Staff has completed a comprehensive financial analysis of these revenues and the utility rates, as well as the projected expenses based on costs associated with day-to-day operations of these funds, the capital projects, debt payments, and annual maintenance. Many variables have to fall into place in order to keep the same projections from last year, which is what we got to this year. We were able to project a 15% increase to utility rates last year during the 2025 budget development process, and that's where we ended up. Again, many variables had to fall into place in order for this to happen. Customer usage had to come in where we thought it was, weather conditions, development fee revenue, project cost estimates, along with operational cost estimates. Again, the proposed increase is in line with the 5-year plan, which we began last year. Next slide. Additionally, staff has spent the last couple of months getting the Flow Advisory Committee up to speed on the latest enterprise data. So far, we've completed 2 pre-meetings and 1 official meeting in August with the Flow Advisory Group. The group's main objective is to offer feedback and recommendations to council on upcoming enterprise-funded projects and more actively participate in the 2027 rate development and 5-year CIP. Next slide. The last couple of years, we've been working with AECOM, which is a consultant on our asset management. And based on their recommendations, maintenance dollars have been increased in order to facilitate a reduction of our backlogged projects. The proposed rate increase allows the utility to maintain a proactive maintenance schedule consistent with the capital improvement recommendations that AECOM has made. And this protects the community's investment in water infrastructure, and it also avoids more costly emergency repairs that come with, inevitably with deferred maintenance. Next slide. So as detailed in the adopted budget by council in 2025, the 5-year rate plan includes a second-year increase totaling $16.89 per month for the average single-family home and under $12 a month for an apartment. This is based on 9,000 gallons of usage. In the winter, primarily for 9 months, we usually see more like 4,000 or 5,000 gallons used by a single-family home. This is 9,000 based on some of the summer usage that's going on now. So 9,000 is the average we use. Most months will most likely be under that. Next slide. Here's an example of the apartment average monthly bill. And you can see it's just around $12. But again, it will most likely be under that for most months. Next slide. 90% of the enterprise revenue comes from rates. Again, we don't include any of the sales tax or property tax. There are even less grants than we had a year ago at this time. So user rates are by far the most important funding mechanism for all the enterprise funds. Again, this is year 2 of a 5-year plan that focuses on infrastructure. Next slide. The prominent focus for utilities as represented in the CIP, 5-year CIP, is ongoing maintenance and replacing aging infrastructure and increasing the reliability of the 4 enterprise funds that I mentioned earlier. Additionally, new regulatory mandates have had a major effect on these rates over the last several years. Next slide. So this is a forecast of our 5-year plan within the water fund specifically. You can see we do have a positive fund balance at the bottom, or working capital, throughout the next several years. But you can see also why we needed to increase the rates when you look at some of the out years, such as 2028. Next slide. This is the wastewater fund or the sewer fund. We're already planning the next phase of the wastewater project. This is an expansion project that is needed primarily for having a lot to do with these regulatory requirements and a little associated with growth. We anticipate needing to issue additional bonds not only in 2026, but also in 2032. You can see that this fund does have a larger fund balance, and the reason is because phase 2 of this project will be partially cash funded. It won't be all financed. Next slide. This is our smallest fund by far, the reuse fund. It's always steady. It will be steady over the next couple of years, and we don't plan to issue any debt in this particular fund. Next slide. This is the newest fund, the Stormwater Fund, which was just enacted last year. 2026 working capital within this gets pretty small in 2026 at $1 million. We do feel confident that the 9% increase is sufficient for this year, and you can see that it gets increasingly a little bit more each year. Again, this was just started this year in 2025, the Stormwater Fund. By way, it goes, it's important to mention that all the other Front Range communities had a stormwater fund for several years, probably the last 20 years. Broomfield was the only one that did not have a stormwater fund. So we were essentially funding this out of sewer. We do have costs associated with stormwater, of course, and drainage and flood mitigation and whatnot. We were just paying it out of the sewer fund previously, where most other entities all have their own stormwater fund, which we do now. Next slide. So last year, Council established a utility rate assistance fund. This was to help eligible households for 2025. We are recommending that this URAF, which we call it, stay in place, but at a 60% AMI versus the current 100% AMI. And that's average median income. A majority of the applicants that we did have come in to receive some of this funding fell under the 60% AMI category, which is why we have that recommendation. Next slide. So a few communication highlights about the rates in the enterprise fund. We'll have this information on our website along with the Broomfield magazine. We also have a short video on the website. We'll continue to notify folks within the bills themselves through social media and the community newsletter. We're also creating, which will be out in about a week or two, the online bill estimator, which is someone can go in and put their own information into a bill estimator, and residents will be able to calculate their bill on the website. This will be available again in the next couple of weeks. All this information will be highlighted on our website as well. Next slide. So moving over to bond or financed projects, in 2021, Council approved a debt policy. Prior to that, there was not one. it's worth noting that Broomfield has one of the highest credit ratings within the state, not the highest, but one of the highest, and has had credit rating upgrades over the last couple of years. We have a very solid debt service ratio at 4.2%. That's below industry standards. And our established rate plan is viewed positively by rating agencies and investors of these bonds. Per council direction, CCOB will be issuing 3 bonds in the next 6 months, which is pretty ambitious. The first is a general fund project to fund the police and the first phase of the court remodel. The second bond would be for 2 new water tanks in the water fund. And lastly, the wastewater, the expansion of the wastewater project and the facility. And that again will have several phases to it. This is just phase 1. All these will occur in terms of the bond issuances in January or February of 2026. Next slide. So the issuance of the RFP, that's a request for proposal. It's common to have a couple different underwriters to help with these bonds and issue the actual bonds themselves. And with 3 large bonds, it's common to have 2 underwriters. We chose Stifel, and Piper Sandler, and they've been selected as our underwriters. We've had a lot of meetings with them already to do the bond issuances. Both are mainstays in the Colorado bond market. Next slide. Next slide again. In terms of next steps, we'll have 2 upcoming study sessions. The first will be September 18th, where we'll have half of the department heads talk about their budget and some of the highlights within their budget. And the second half will go on September 25th. Those are both Thursdays. And the 2026 proposed budget will be available in early September. And first and second reading of the actual proposed budget will be October 14th and October 28th. Next slide. So in conclusion, it cannot be understated the amount of internal collaboration that we've put forth to adjust this financially constrained budget, both for 2025 revised and 2026. We've continued to prioritize public safety and our 5-year plan to fund the infrastructure. And the organization has taken the necessary steps in the spending to live within our means, as Jennifer, City Manager Hoffman mentioned at the onset of this meeting. That concludes tonight's presentation.
I'm sure you all have a plethora of questions, which we are very excited to answer. Shall we start with, yes, sir. I'm gonna have, oh, thanks.
Good evening and thank you. My name is Dan McCauley. I live up behind the high school and I lead the Flatirons Habitat for Humanity. Like cities and governments, my organization, my nonprofit partners are also seeing strains on our resources, and we are charged with caring for the most vulnerable. As you look forward, the nonprofit organizations that serve this population are going to need assistance. We're going to see greater demands on our food pantries. We're going to see greater demands on affordable housing resources. We're going to see greater demands in mental health and addiction and all the other areas in which nonprofits provide services. Where in this plan is the city and county planning to help us?
We appreciate that question. I know that is on every single resident's mind to varying degrees. That's part of the trade-off conversation of having the finite pot of funds, how you're going to expend those funds. Something that is in the budget right now is not going to be in the budget in order to expand or enhance or assist, whether it be nonprofits and or those other service level agencies. As we see, and part of the heart-wrenching piece is not only the unknowns with what the budgetary impacts will be, whether it be from the federal government or from the state government. When you hear structural deficit, there are going to be additional impacts to local governments. No one, not our residents aren't going to call the state and say, you took my funding that I've been receiving. Generally, residents don't care who is funding that assistance, only that they have access to it. So it's the local governments, it's the city and the counties that will field those questions. So those are difficult conversations that every municipality and county will be fielding, of how to close those gaps and to what degree, and what isn't going to happen in order for those service level deltas to be covered. It will be a conversation that all legislative bodies, including our local elected officials, will be discussing for the next how many years. Other questions? Yes, sir.
First, my compliments to the presenters. This was easy to understand and follow in a very good time format. Thank you. The water rate increase, 1689, is that in what I would call the fixed portion of the water bill, or is it amortized over the use rate, increasing the variable part of the water bill?
It's an excellent question. James, would you be kind enough to pull up that slide? And I'm going to ask Mr. Clark to address that specific question.
That's a good question. Thank you. To answer your question specifically for the 2026 rate increases, it includes both the base fee and the usage fee. Last year, what we were finding is that there was a lot of volatility within the usage component, and that was primarily what our rates were based on. So in order to have better revenue stability, we increased just the base rate. That was last year. And this year we're doing both. We understand that conservation is certainly a part of it as well. And, essentially through the tiered system, folks get penalized for the more that they use. And so that will definitely be part of our rate increase this year.
Do you have a sense for the percentage between the two? Of the 1689, will it be half and half, 64? I mean, do you have any sense for how that works out?
Well, it really depends on the usage component. It's basically 15%, both to the usage component and to the base fee. So it's essentially half when you look at it that way.
Thank you.
And there's additional graphs that go into more detail in the memo with regards to the enterprise funds that have those percentages per category.
Debt service level is at 4.2% of revenue. Based on the bonds we plan to submit in 2026, what do we project the debt service level will be going forward?
Another good question. And we've been looking into that. We'll be right over the 5% mark. We're also defeasing some of our debt as well. So not only are we taking on more debt, but we are paying it off. So we have been diligent in doing that over the last several years. It basically goes just right over the 5%. A lot of the A22 ratings, a lot of those folks can be even up to 10% and still be within pretty good ratings. We're at a very good manageable level. We just had Moody's increase our rate last year. And they really looked at our overall leverage, both in the general fund and on the enterprise fund. And they considered our debt very manageable, which is why they gave us additional, along with these rate increases that they kind of see that we're implementing, that helped with our rate increases over the last couple of years.
So my question, which was primarily trying to get a rough size, and it sounds like a relatively small delta, not something massive.
Right.
Thanks. And Jennifer Hoffman, you know what my next question is. Please help me understand the fragile to no longer fragile adjective being used about the upcoming budget.
It's a great reminder that words matter. And staff spends an extraordinary amount of time selecting those words because it's sticky, clearly. So thank you for your question. As we move through, again, the budget is not a fixed document. The budget is much like any household document, that it influences, it informs, it guides. And as we move through, particularly in the volatility. So when we say stable, given the circumstances at that time, it was stable. When we start including the federal modifications and outcomes, in addition to becoming more acclimated to what the state budget deficit looks like, in addition to the tariffs, in addition to that overall picture, it leads us into we're fragile. So the fragile connotation was it's just so volatile. And will continue to be. So part of the structural conversation with these budgets is much like from our personal perspective, and to your question, Mr. Hardman, with the available debt capacity. Just because you have capacity doesn't mean you spend it. So there are industry best practice and standards, and then there are being cognizant not only of can you afford it, but to what degree do you need it and when do you need it? So the conversations that we've been having, again, as Mr. Clark mentioned, Broomfield never had a debt policy before. So this council has not entertained taking on any debt. The last debt that was taken was in 2017. And we wanted to ensure that we were on a time frame when the interest rates dropped significantly pre-COVID. A lot of folks made the decision to refinance, much like individuals do, which is a sound financial decision. As long as you don't take money out, as long as you don't extend the time period of repayment. If you're simply reducing, if you move through those steps, and so Broomfield made the decision, recommended to council that we not take advantage because the cost benefit ratio didn't justify the cost to even bring down the rates. So when you're drilling in to make these data-driven decisions, and I know folks talk about data-driven decisions all the time. It's no joke. You have got to understand what you're talking about to really have that be what your model is based on. So when we're talking about debt and assuming additional debt, we wanted to ensure that we were right in that 6 to 9 month time period of paying off the other COP before we even entertained taking on more. Even though we knew 4 years ago, we were busting at the seams with our PD building. So need doesn't necessarily drive execution and activity. It's a component of it, but it doesn't drive it. It's that multi-pronged approach to ensure the decisions are sustainable. That's a longer answer than you were hoping for, but
it's okay. If I restate it in my terms, and it sounds like you've learned more, and in mathematical terms, the standard deviation is lower, therefore the fragility is much less.
So I am going to take that snapshot and use that. Yes, that's correct. And that's not to say that the state that we are in right now isn't going to return to a more fragile state tomorrow, right? Thus, the conversation that we've been consistently having with each other and with council is resiliency is a word that a lot of folks used consistently throughout COVID. And it's an exhausting term because there comes a point in time to where you don't just pop right back up, whether it's financially, emotionally, mentally, whatever that looks like. That next phase is really buoyancy, which is we know that that wave is coming. We don't know when exactly it's coming, but it will come. And so when we are submerged under that water, you try to train yourself on the front end that you're going to take a deep breath. You're going to be submerged, but you're not going to freak out. You're not going to flail around. You're not going to waste your energy because you see it coming. So you're going to look around at your other folks that are also submerged. We're okay. We're going to be okay. So that's the capacity building for 2026 was a structural year that we begin to activate and implement. 2027 is going to be more difficult because we will be more fragile, not only because of the external circumstances, but as we move through some of these trade-off conversations, it's going to be emotionally difficult, not just financially, which adds to the fragility.
That's all my
You're
question.
very welcome.
Thank you. Sarah Brown, The Outlook. And I really appreciate the presentation today. I watched it on Tuesday, and I think the second watch helped me understand it all. So I appreciate the redundancy, perhaps. I also wanted to dig into the water rate question a little bit. So you mentioned that we are in year 2 out of the 5-year infrastructure plan, and those increased water rates are part of that. Do you foresee the increasing rates each of the future 3 years also? It looked like from the table, yes, but that's definitely a question that people have on their mind.
Yes, and we appreciate that question. I'm going to try to watch how many times we say that because we try to be very authentic when we say we appreciate the question and not just have it be. So we appreciate that question because it also allows us to become more acclimated with what the answer is. I'm going to have Graham start that conversation. James, there's a slide. Thank you, brother. You already know. Okay, there. Yes. Graham, do you want to walk through that?
Yes, and we do have a 5-year plan, not only on the rates, but also on the projects. And so we know what infrastructure projects are coming in the 5-year CIP. And so it's all planned out for the next 5 years. And so, one mistake that communities make is that they don't do increases each year. Then you're going to get behind inflation and your purchasing power is going to go down. It's best practice to have at least a smaller increase each year. You can see what we're projecting for 27 and 28, and it's roughly the 7%. But that could change. Those are our best estimates at this time. But yes, it is best practice to have that rate increase each year. And once we get caught up with some of these backlogged projects, we intend for that to go down.
Maybe that. Okay. Sorry about that. So if the rate from the 7%-ish, but we're projecting continued increases forever? And I guess a follow-up of how does that compare to other local municipalities and the communities around us?
Good question. So right now, we're right in the middle in terms of our water rates. For the last 20 years, we've been below by quite a bit, which has kind of put us in this predicament. But going forward, yeah, the 7% for a couple of years, and then the intention would be to have it less. But again, best practice is actually to do at least inflationary rate increases each year. Otherwise, you're going to get behind again. That's kind of how we got into this in the first place, is there were several years where there wasn't, and then inflation goes up and you're actually not able to keep up. And so, but we do intend for those to be smaller increases, inflation, annual numbers, 2 to 3, 4%. Those are, and that would be in perpetuity. Yeah.
I'm going to add to that just a little bit. That's one of the components that when we are advising council on development, those are big conversations that we need to have because the backlog is what we will, it's the asset management piece. It's the maintenance that should have been done that wasn't done. Now, as we move forward, in order to look at those 7%, if we go back to the CPI and the inflationary rate, when we add to that level of infrastructure needs, it's part of the conversation of why it's so important on the House slide. We refer to it as the House slide, but it's part of that the X axis and the Y axis about that model of decision making for development. And while everyone agrees to the elements on that model, oftentimes when it doesn't yield what you're hoping it yields, the inclination is to modify, which is fine as long as it is an intentional decision based on what the outcome is. So any one of those variables will influence whether it's 7% or 3% or 15%, because that's all correlative. And as we become more inclined and acclimated towards these data-driven decisions, which is one of the reasons that flow is such a big component for us, our flow committee, is to really dig in and understand and add that, not just eyes, but level of specific experience to help us inform, particularly the council members, of what needs to happen next. So it's all interconnected. That water does not stand alone, and water's never going to get cheaper.
Yeah, I'll just add one more point. Here's one way to think of it. When we do a 3% increase, that's just covering our own cost. Our costs go up 3% at least each year. So that's just us trying to keep up, right? It's not actually us gaining anything in that specific instance.
So do you find that like today, if we're saying it's 7%, is that similar to what Lafayette has or Superior has? Or because we're playing catch up, are ours now higher rates? Do you know?
It's hard.
A lot of the rates aren't out yet. We're one of the first ones to talk about the rates so far. They will be coming in the next month or two as departments do this process that we've just completed. Everybody's a little different. Ours are maybe slightly higher, and I don't even know that for sure. That's just anecdotally. But when you look at somebody like the neighboring, instance, Erie and some of these other communities, their water rates are considerably higher because of when they bought their water, right? We've had our water rates for a while. And now what we're doing is we're not buying additional water at this point, but what we're doing is just doing the backlog. And once we get up to speed, I think we'll be in a really good shape.
Thank you.
But I have 7 questions.
Nice.
They gave me too much time to think, so I'll try and be quick. I know we have a few minutes. Sean McKenzie from Baseline. Uh, thank you for the metaphor on the submerging. I've trained with ex-Navy SEALs, so I understand very graphically what it means to go.
I really appreciate that comment because sometimes, Mr. McKenzie, I say that and you can tell that people kind of have that RCA dog look of,
Mm.
what are you trying to get to? So thank you for that.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions. The first one I'm going to pick up on is the water. Can you provide a bit of context? Why were the rates depressed in prior years? Those big conversations that you talked about, did they happen? Sort of the context on that.
So, what I'm going to address is since I've been in the role. And not something that happened prior. So again, that's the difference between accountability and responsibility. Can't be responsible for those decisions, but I can be accountable for what we do with them now. So 2019 brought almost a completely new council because we had the situation called oil and gas that was occurring in Broomfield. Immediately after that, we had to acclimate to COVID. So 2020 and 2021 was primarily spent on keeping the lights on and fundamentally trying to figure out where we were, not only as a community, but from a public health perspective. Our investigation into enterprise and water really began in earnest in late 2021. 2022 was the first time that we pulled the lever, and it was all consciously not to impact our residents with any water rates, nor did we have a full and comprehensive view of our infrastructure. So Broomfield, we're transitioning out of this by our enterprise system, but we were spreadsheet nirvana. So we had hundreds of spreadsheets. We had not only our inventory from our infrastructure, from the enterprise, but all of our business development agreements, all of our historical documents that generally were passed on through legacy conversations, because it was almost impossible to have a network of, here's where you need to look with all of these various spreadsheets. So when we pulled the lever, it was on development and tap fees, because historically it's been development pays for itself. I don't know who came up with that term. Historically, it was never true. Right now, it isn't true, and it won't be true in the future. Development pays for infrastructure for right now. There isn't ongoing maintenance nor operations when we're talking about development fees. So pulling that lever for the development fees, thinking that that was going to shore us up to a certain extent. To what extent, we didn't know. When subsequent to that, as soon as we did the pulling the lever on the development fees, we also began to pull the lever not on the base rate, but on the consumption rate. So it was the development fees and the consumption rate. We thought, okay, that's not going to directly impact our residents, particularly on the consumption, because you can control what that looks like, except Mother Nature chose that year to have the most precipitation that Colorado has had in the last 25 years. So when you're relying on revenue and your development slows significantly based on increasing inflation rates and supply chain issues, and then your other revenue stream based on consumption, people don't need water because of the precipitation. That was in 2023, end of 2023. It was clear at that point, back to Mr. Hardawin's point of, we've learned a lot. And part of that learning a lot was bringing in AECOM to provide those models, to do the deep dive, to help us have a central repository for the plethora of data that we had and have it mean something. it was a very difficult realization to come to the community and to council with those two levers aren't near enough. So it was during the year of 2024, where those conversations, we were now on 2.5 years of bringing it forward, understanding the backlog, understanding that the base rate had to be increased and increased significantly. And that's what drives the 5-year plan. Again, and decoupling that would create, it's not like pulling a thread. You can't just say, well, let's just have 5 years of 10% instead of knowing that we're going to go to 7 instead of 15. Let's just do 10%. Which it's a luxury for a community to be able to have any smoothing measures whatsoever. Essentially, smoothing, when you're talking about water, is the kick the can approach. And that isn't something that our community has the luxury to do now or in the future.
Excellent. You talked about the data-driven decision-making and touched on the ERP there. Can you talk a little bit more about that, like SAP, Oracle, and then also how are we using AI across the org?
So AI is one of our structural modifications. And much like we talked about, I'm gonna start with AI and then I'll go to the ERP. We liken AI, quite frankly, to having discovered fire. It wields that much power. And when you have a tool that has that type of capacity potential, making sure that you have appropriate guidelines, subsections, training, sandbox, outlay in a public domain is really where you start. I think that Broomfield is, I don't want to say significantly ahead, but from all of the city manager meetings and county manager meetings that I'm a part of, we are significantly advanced in that we have champions in our organization that are helping. The first thing you have to do is get your mind right. And then you deploy the technology. But getting your mind right on the front end is not coming from a place of fear, but embracing what this means to us. So we think of it as a sandwich. Human beings are going to be on the front, developing, scanning, ensuring fidelity and equity. Then we'll deploy the tool, and then you have that back end of that human being piece. I think this answer will look very different next year. I am proud to say that from a leadership perspective, embracing what it looks like and having the guidelines, the team, we made the decision that it should not be in IT because again, it's an organization community tool. It's not necessarily a technology tool. So while it started in IT, it really is in the city manager's office from a deployment perspective. When we look at ERP, that transition, so the timeline is also spelled out thoroughly in the memo. That's been a 2.5-year project. My heart is full and I am eternally grateful for this finance team because they can go anywhere and that already has ERP rather than this manual system. That again, it's spreadsheet and golden key nirvana. So when you make 2 tweaks, what is going to be a simple modification or request or report request this time next year requires a team of 7 to identify the various spreadsheets and those tracking mechanism and the domino effect. So we have about 255 folks We just had our, I don't know, 220th meeting, but we had our celebration kickoff. We've identified a vendor. GOFA has been a pivotal partner in helping us with that change management perspective, because again, oftentimes people think that technology is going to be the game changer when it's the adaptive challenges. So again, it's getting your mind right about how to use it under what circumstances. So between our IT, our finance, and our HR, and then subsequent to that, it'll be the asset management will be rolled into the ERP.
Cool, thank you. I know we're over. Are you okay? Or
Oh, heck yeah. We love talking about this.
ERPs? Nothing gets me.
All of it.
Okay, so my next question is around the ROI. How do we think about the ROI on the services that we provide? And then I think there was mention of some of the educational outreach that's being done in the last slide deck. How do we think about the ROI on that, on the different forms of channels, and how this information is reaching residents? So put simply, if we spend X amount of dollars on a park, how many people are going through the park? So like, what's the return on investment for that? And then if we are going to update, let's say, the budget, and this is what's coming out and we want the community to know, we can update that, let's say, on the calculate your bill on the website. How many clicks, how many people are going to that? So what's the return on investment of developing that? And do we have like a graphic that says for each dollar, this is how it's getting split up, sort of similar to the house cake?
So I'm going to pack those as much as I can in order. ROI is, we just had a department head meeting today, and ROI was a big part of that conversation. So again, from a quality perspective versus a quantity, qualitative versus a quantitative. So ensuring that's, again, that's back to that data-driven decisions. We need to make sure that our tools, when we're evaluating ROI, have a correlative measure, that it is in fact quantitative and not qualitative. Can't measure ROI from a qualitative perspective. And when you're in a service level, which is what we do, right, delivering services, part of that has to be based on council priorities and community priorities. So that your filter through which you view a new park or additional trails or purchasing additional open space. From a budgetary perspective, we're rolling out a new strategic plan. Broomfield's never had a strategic plan. And what is that in alignment with those community goals? So are we spending dollars directly correlative to those community goals? What is this? So it's not just providing a graphic, right? It's, are we moving the needle? And to what degree are we moving the needle? Again, with those various levers. I like nothing more than to be able to do the ROIs, because that is the non-emotional, data-driven decisions that you follow regardless of what it yields. We implemented 3.5 years ago an equity model for all of our CIP projects. So historically, it's been the person that activates the quickest, that is the loudest, that had most direct impact, whether it be with city staff or the elected officials. It drove a lot of our CIP decisions. Now we have a repeatable process that have 16 elements through which all CIPs, which is capital improvement projects, pass through. And then we have a multidisciplinary team that reviews Part of it is the return on investment. Part of it is the cost, not just the cost effectiveness, not just the cost benefit ratio, but also the cost recovery. To what degree do we model the cost recovery for our, particularly for our Parks and Rec department, which, again, anytime you have those dollars are attached, we consider the equity model, we consider the ROI, we consider the contingency models. But if you have a repeatable process that everyone is aware of on the front end, you're all speaking the same language, you have the same definitions. That's a great way to be able to manage those expectations as well as the outcomes in order to have alignment. What did I miss?
Nothing. I think that's fine. I have 3 more questions.
Okay.
I thought the house cake was good, but on the
Dollar.
how the dollar split.
We have the dollar, but we did this probably, I don't know, Jeff and I came on pretty much at the same time, but a lot of folks think that on the property tax, because it says City and County of Broomfield, that we get all of that $5,000 a year. We get about 25% of the overall property tax. Metro districts, fire districts, special districts, but the schools get about 70%. 50%. Schools get 50%, we get 25%, and then the fire districts, special districts get the other 25%. Part of the breakdown, we have more data and graphics that are super fun, and part of that is that budget alignment piece, right? Where is our money going? So we need to make sure that the money that's being spent is spent on the council priorities. And or when those adjustments are made within those council priorities, that allows us then to have that correlative conversation about what's going to continue to happen, what isn't going to continue to happen. But those graphics with the dollar, generally we use to display property tax and where it goes.
Cool. Do we have Sankey grass too? That would be cool.
Tell me what that is.
It's just
I want to know something that's cool.
it's another way to break down, like in the economic deck, how money, revenues, and costs are being split from a general total and then line by line, but in a cool visual way. Anyways, I can send
We
you a
want to
link.
be cool and have visuals, so we can talk more about that.
Yeah. Okay, but the modeling, do we have a sensitivity analysis? I.e., like how much shock can we withstand when you talk about going underwater? What's the worst case scenario? How confident we are in that?
I'm going to field the first part of this, and then I'm going to have our economists come up. Those conversations have been occurring since COVID. And so statutorily, municipalities generally have around 11% of reserves, which means if something catastrophic happens, I mean, there's a lot of conversations at the state right now. They're going to fall below in order to balance their budget. We don't consider our reserves a savings account. We consider it more like a 401k, that something truly fundamentally catastrophic has to be occurring. So we went from 16.8%, 11% is kind of the bottom line. We went from 16%, we put in place over 3.5 years to get to that 20%, which we feel is buoyancy. So we have a 20% reserve right now. We had to put, we were at 18% last year. So we're going to maintain 20, but we're not going to go above 20 because that's where we think the shock absorption to your term is. Jeff? you have anything to add?
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. I really don't, because the reality is while there is some volatility, the volatility of the revenue side has been generally pretty stable on the property tax. And sales tax was the volatile one. And what we've experienced now is two things that have happened that has changed that. And that's part of the reason for the changes to the long-range financial plan and that modeling. So we can do some sensitivity analysis. The reality is the sales tax has been affected by the at-home buying effectively, and that has adjusted things. But the reality is in Colorado, we have not really seen a property tax restriction or reduction like we have now in a normally positive time. The only other time we've really experienced it in the last 30 years, which Broomfield, by the way, was a growing community at that time. And as I've looked back through the last 30 years of economic data for Broomfield, we actually in this community weathered the Great Recession better than almost anybody else. We actually had positive revenue growth during that period of time. So we are now going to this new pattern, which is an infill redevelopment as well as some greenfield. And so that's part of the reason for the changes in the models. That said, what the strategy has been that Manager Hoffman has put in place with the direction of council is to raise our reserve levels up to 20%, which is they're actually slightly above that right now. That compares to, as an example, the state of Colorado has a required revenue reserve level of 15%. So even though there's the 10% by law, there's also there's the policy side. So we're above that, and that gives us that ability to withstand some shocks. The other part of it is of course, communities are different than the state or the federal government. It's very easy for us to adjust spending and expenditures during the short term because we can do that almost on the fly. And so therefore, what we've done by taking a conservative budgeting and revenue approach, we actually are able to, when the revenue growth grows above what we expect, be able to deploy the money for potential services and goods or services and programs that city council and the community want. So there's several things going on embedded into your question, but that's something that we're recognizing we need to do a better job of, and that's part of the reason for the adjustments in the models.
Yeah, cool, thanks. A couple follow-ups. One is you had a slide, I think it was like page 13 or something, where you showed the costs like for residential and then also commercial. And I think the residential was something like 75% and the commercial was like 25.
Yeah.
What is that going to?
Where it's coming from, you mean, or?
No, what is it going towards?
75 is going to pay for all of those services, whether
Sure.
public works or whatever.
I mean the 25%.
Oh, the 20, it's our obviously our businesses are also asking for police activity. You know, they have police security and other things. They're utilizing some of the other services. Some of our staff, like planning, you know, we work on both sides of it. You know, the team works on both sides of that. The roads, obviously, as you may or may not know, roughly 20%, a little less of our residents work in Broomfield. About 80% go to a job somewhere else. And the same is true actually for our employers. They get most of their employees coming from outside the county. So what we've got to do is maintain quality of roads, quality of other services, maintain that public safety. Businesses take advantage of that. And that's part of the reason why they locate here, is because the reasonableness of the tax levels, but at the same time, the positive services they're seeing and they need. It's just most of the programs are weighted toward a residential use because those are much more human oriented. And what I mean by that is it's a very high touch system that Broomfield has. In ways, I formerly worked for a different city county, which has got good quality services, nothing compared to the high touch level that Broomfield has. I mean, if you go into the library, it's the levels of services, the level of programs that this library puts together are amazing. And this isn't a commercial, this is why the costs are higher on that side.
Yeah. You can thank Julie for that. Excellent. Last question, and then I have to turn it over, is we have the debts that are coming online. We're about half of the cap, 5% or so. What happens to that when the debt comes on?
We're at about we're between 4.2 and 4.6. We'll go to 5.2. somewhere right around there.
Thanks. Hi, Julie Twist, Brandywine, and luckily a couple of my questions have already been asked and answered. I want to first ask the 3 short-term coming up in the near future bonds, and then it was mentioned another possible in 2032. What else do you foresee in terms of big capital spends, and will they be bonded? I know 2 years ago, or a little over 2 years ago, we were having a discussion about funding police and courts and library through an increased sales tax. And then the decision was made to not move forward with that at the time. And now part of that project is being bonded. What else is coming up that you see in the next 5, 10 years?
From a facility perspective, time will tell, right? I mean, again, it's community priorities, it's council priorities, balanced with what can we afford. So again, there's been a lot of dialogue about transportation, additional streams for housing. But again, from a facility perspective, unless otherwise noted by community demands and/or council priorities, we don't foresee anything other than the northern water tanks, the wastewater treatment facility, and the PD and courts buildings.
All right, thank you. My last quick question is, I would like to hear from the 3 of you, just a very quick gut check reaction to all of this. There is a lot. It's a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of interplay. It's a lot of uncertainty. I want to know what concerns you. Is it what you can see? Is it what you can't see? What keeps you up at night when thinking about our financial future and being able to maintain services?
I'm going to go first. I feel like it's like a speed dating round or something, right? Where I'm going to use Julie, again, as I said, we had a department head meeting, and we had a town hall to talk about where we were financially, and the authentic transparency of what we're going to be able to do and what we aren't going to be able to do, and the filter through which we need to be scrutinizing every single decision. It's not business as usual. And every decision that every department head makes impacts that bottom line of what we can roll over in 2026 into 2027, which we know is going to be a more difficult year to solve. I can fundamentally say what I told them is, personally and professionally, this team won't have the professional opportunity to do what we are going to be able to do for this community ever again. This is, and I don't own a pair of rose-colored glasses. I am a realist to a default. But our community and this team will come out stronger and more galvanized. And this is an opportunity in order to do that, because it will take all of us in order to do what needs to be done to set this community on a path of kindness and sustainability and thoughtfulness as we move forward. Mr. Clock, what keeps you up at night, brother? Now that the 2025 divides in 2026 budget is nearly finished.
Getting
Not
there.
quite.
Yeah.
Nearly.
you know, one thing I think, yeah, when we look at the enterprise funds and you look at those rates, the 7%, a lot has to happen in order for that to be 7%. So if it's really wet, if it's, you know, precipitation makes a big difference. If people are going to do xeriscaping, like you want the conservation and at the same time you don't, right? Because you need the revenue, right? Otherwise, yeah, it throws the models off. So, you know, I guess if any of those variables changes very much, it's going to be more than 7, and that would really, it would just be difficult because obviously the community would have to pay more, and you know, it's somewhat out of your control, but those variables make it difficult, you know, especially, you know, we got a bunch of rain earlier this year. It's gotten better now, but like April and May was almost double what it normally is. Obviously that affects the usage quite a bit, the consumer usage. So that was kind of keeping me up at night. It's gotten a lot drier, which it's just a dichotomy of what you want, you know, kind of intuitive. But anyway, that does keep me up at night. Yeah.
I'm going to take your question slightly different, but I will answer it also. So first off is I think there's two strengths that are really incredible for this community. And one of them is the economic strength of it. It's a very diversified economy, as I mentioned earlier. And it's been, whether it's be thoughtfully built or whether it was accidentally built doesn't matter, but we really have a very strong positive place in this community. And I was in a different community a few years back, and this is one of the few places, knowing a lot about the Colorado and metropolitan areas, this is one of the few communities I would have come to. And so that's how I've ended up here. So I think the foundations are all incredible here. And I mean that both from the business side and the community side. I think the other part that I would say is really positive here that I've experienced over the last years, and it was built on the foundation of those before us. So this isn't, you know, but I think it's been emphasized, and that is we've moved from a decision-making process that's around transactions into a value-oriented decision-making. And what I mean by that is it's so oftentimes that you see decisions made because of this is what it's going to bring us today. And I don't mean it from the long-range perspective. I just mean that we as individuals and as households, when you make value decisions versus you make transactional decisions, you end up at a different place. It may create a little bit of pain in the short term while you're doing it, but it's the right thing to do. And that's what this community has been doing. And I think it's been actually amplified over the last few years. So I would say that. Now I'll go to your specific question, which is what keeps me concerned is it's the fact that right now we are in a very transactional period. And so I'm very concerned. And the thing that I spend almost all of my time on, part of the reason why I'm here, part of the reason why in this conversation, the three of us have oftentimes, I'm focused 95% of my time on future revenue. That's what we really have to amplify. And unfortunately, almost all the conversation is always around expenditures. And I mean that in the public sense, that there's so much, how do we control this cost? How do we, the water rates have to go up 3% or 5 or 7 or 14. But it's really, if you think about it in the 1 year perspective, yes, it may be a big jump, but how do we get ourselves in a place that they're not going up in 10 years? And how are we meeting tomorrow's needs? Because the thing that I've always learned from all of my public work over the last several decades is spending the money today to lower the amount of money you have to spend tomorrow. Let's be, wise that way. So make the investments today where you can. And this community has done that historically. And so it answers your question. But I think if we spend too much time trying to control a cost or an expense, we lose track of that it's the revenue that really is what we're trying to do, because that's what allows us to make all the good choices for the types of services and programs. So I know it's a little more philosophic, but that's what economists do. We try not to live in the daily sometimes. We like to live big picture. So thank you.
Thank you.
Will say I have 3 teenage daughters, so this is the easy part.
Thank you all so much. We appreciate your questions and again, all feedback is good feedback. And we bid you all adieu tonight that are joining us online. We look forward to several additional conversations to come. Our department heads are coming, half of them are coming on the 19th, on the 18th. And then the other half will be coming in their videos. Everybody loves to make those videos. For their department presentations, and we'll be fielding questions during those 2 nights. And then we will be coming back to council for first readings and second readings in October. And then we have our 2027 budget kickoff on November 5th. The challenge continues. So I hope everybody has a great night. And thanks to staff that stayed late. Our AV guys they're just the best. We're grateful. Good night.